fellow bookworms to Tibra's Den. My name is Whitney and we are reading Nora Roberts' Legacy. Just finished chapters 21 through 25, so if you're not quite to that point, don't hesitate to jump off this video and then come back once you got all caught up. As always, we are discussing these chapters and these characters in depth, and so there is a certain level of spoilers. And I do want to give a trigger warning for the set of chapters in particular. There is talk of suicide, and then obviously we've been dealing with like murder and such throughout the book, but it is talked about pretty heavily in this book as well. So I just want to add that in. And then I do want to let you guys know, in case you didn't see Thursday's video, next month we are going to be reading Jim Butcher's Stormfront. So if you want to participate next month, definitely pick this up. If this is a reread for you, I do still hope you will reread it and participate with us and just kind of look at it in a little bit of a different light as we do the discussion questions and everything like that. But yeah, if you haven't seen last Thursday's video, definitely go check that out. And that way you can get all the specifics, all the information of where you can pick up this book, and then the breakdown of the chapters and everything are in the description of that video. So let's go ahead and jump right in to the discussion questions for Legacy. Of course, we are starting with chapter 21. With the latest poem, the poet seems ready to focus on Adrian. Do you think it was smart of her to call them out in a video? And I don't necessarily think it was smart, but I do understand her reasoning, and I do agree with her decision to go ahead and keep it up. And so, Tisha and Harry in particular gave her a lot of backlash and really, really wanted her to take it down. And I understand like where they're coming from, but at the end of the day, the poet's a danger no matter what. And I think actually by calling him out, or them, and kind of pushing them to maybe act sooner, it gives her a chance to be more ready. When you think there's a threat that can happen soon, you're more cautious, you're taking the safety precautions, but the longer it drags out, the more lax you get about that safety. And so I still don't think they're gonna act any sooner. They, in this poem, they pinpointed summer specifically, and so I don't think her videos necessarily gonna have them act out any sooner, but it probably definitely added fuel to the fire. But like I said, she's in danger either way, so I think that was kind of a little bit of a stress release for her, to kind of again do something, just like hiring the PI. You're not just sitting back doing nothing, and just taking it. So I agree with her reasoning, even though it probably wasn't the smartest decision. And what do you think about the revelation that it was the wife of Adrian's biological father that leaked the story all those years ago? And I hadn't really thought about it, but it does make sense, especially the way Rachel presented it. Like, I can see exactly, why she would have, and her reasoning. And then obviously it did backfire on her. But, and she had to know of her husband's temper and such, like, so, but like I said, it did backfire on her, and I think that affected the children even more, and kind of that cycle, that led to them to be potentially the poet, more so than just their father's death, especially if they did learn, we'll talk about this later on, but if they did learn, that their mother was the one that leaked it, that would have definitely affected them, and and then just her whole struggle after the fact. So we learn more about Adrian's half sibling, which I predicted could be the poet. If this is true, do you think it is more likely the half brother or half sister? And after reading this set of chapters, I'm still leaning towards the brother, which I had all along. Like, I really thought it was a male. And I did get thrown off, and I did waver a little bit because the author kept pointedly bringing up that it could be a she, which I thought was odd. And, it was very pointedly, with multiple characters bringing it up. So that kind of threw me off. And so I do think the sister is involved somehow. But I still, after reading these chapters, especially chapter 25, the way it ended, I am definitely leaning towards the brother for sure. And in this specific chapter, we learn two of the murdered women's connection to the affairs of Adrian's father. What credence does this give to this being the criteria for the women the poet chooses? And when I wrote this question, obviously I hadn't finished reading the rest of the set. And so obviously after reading it, like we know like they're choosing women on the affairs list. There's no doubt about it at this point. So I think that's it's safe to say like that's who they're choosing is women that their father had affairs with. But I don't know why, because like some of the women, like why those specific women and not others, because there's a big list, and they've had all these years and they haven't necessarily gotten through a lot of the women, and we don't know why that is. And so it'll be interesting to kind of see maybe how that plays out and maybe those women were easier to find or had a bigger impact. I don't know. But it is kind of interesting that it's, these specific women and then, some of the others are still, a lot of the others like, and they talk about the percentages and such later on in the chapters. Um, but there's still quite a few women alive, and with as many number of years, so maybe their travel was restricted. It's who knows at this point, but I think we'll definitely learn that going forward for sure. So that's it for chapter 21. Let's go ahead and move on to chapter 22. Not that the others aren't, but Raylan is extremely supportive of Adrian's reaction to the poet without judgment. Do you think it is the dynamic of their relationship or his character that causes him to react differently? And so I think, obviously the others, and he is too, they're very protective of Adrian and but when they discuss the poet, like I think the others, kind of call out Adrian and especially some of her decisions, and they do they come from a place of caring, like they want her to be as safe as possible. But with Raylan, there's no judgment there, like he just listens. And I think it's actually more typical for like a romantic partner to be overly protective. And so I think it's definitely more his character. Like that's just kind of the man he is, and we've seen that throughout. He has a lot of compassion and intuition. Um, so I don't think it's necessarily their relationship. It's just more his character and his personality. What are your thoughts on the poet's focus on Adrian versus the women they are killing? And I really think Raylan hit the nail on the head. Like there is that blood connection, and then there's also they're kind of on the same level. If it is the half siblings, they're on the same. Adrian's on the same level as them, and she kind of had the life that they didn't have. You know, they were kind of robbed of that essentially. So I think he was definitely right with his whole reasoning. Like you're more of a focus because of the blood connection. And they blame you more than they blame because their father had been sleeping with all these women, and so it wasn't until he fathered a child with one of these women that it all kind of spiraled out of control. So I do think they kind of blame Adrian for that, and then again, there's that blood connection, so that's why they're so focused on her. And then they're using the other women to kind of vent their anger and such, and maybe practice a little bit too. But what do you think of Raylan's theory that the mother's death might not have been a suicide? Again, I think he is completely correct. She died just before the murder start, and if they had learned that she was the one that leaked the story, that definitely could have set everything off, and so she could have been the first murder, and then they just kind of kept going from there. But I do think he is completely correct in that. Like I think it was an accident. Learning all this stuff. I think he is 100% correct. So Adrian mentions she has never had a full 2-week vacation. Yet she is worried more about the kids being okay with her being included on the family vacation. How does this showcase the woman she has become? And I really think it shows her character. Um, she is definitely by all means kind of a workaholic like her mom is, but when it comes down to it, like she's more concerned with people than work. And so even though, she's never taken a 2 week vacation, she's not really concerned about how she's gonna, figure out the work thing. Like she knows it's gonna be okay and everything. She's more concerned with making sure the kids are okay with her being included. And I think that really shows, the kind of woman she is. Like, again, it's easy to look at the surface of somebody and to, well, she's a workaholic. And, we've always seen that Adrian's been a little bit more balanced with her, than her mom. She has those strong friendships and everything like that. But like I said, Lena is very work focused. So even though, she has a friendship, she wouldn't take a 2 week vacation. There's no way. Even if Mimi, as close as she is with Mimi, said, let's go take a 2 week vacation, it's not going to happen. Where with Adrian, like I said, she that's more her focus is the people. Work goes along with that, and she definitely is a very, very hard worker. But that's her focus, and I think it shows her compassion and everything with making sure that the kids are okay. So that is it for chapter 22. Let's go ahead and move on to chapter 23. As Raylan is processing his feelings for Adrian and moving on from Laura Lee, are you surprised that he is more concerned with not adding an extra burden to Adrian than figuring out where she stands? And I'm not. I think his reasoning's kind of faulty because I think it's more stressful, because she even later on, well, I think in the next chapter, we see that she doesn't know where they stand either. And so, she's kind of worrying about that as well. And I think that adds more stress. And an important part of communication is definitely, or, relationships is definitely communication. I kind of messed that up, but that's a key component of a relationship. And I know in the beginning it's hard because you kind of second guess, whether you should say something or not. But I do think his reasoning of not adding extra stress to her is faulty because not knowing where they stand is just as stressful for her as it is for him. But I do think, again, that kind of shows his compassion and his kindness, knowing she's going through a lot. And so instead of, you're like, well, where do you stand with this relationship? He's just happy to let the relationship flow for now, even though it's something that's on his mind and causing him stress. So Adrian is thinking about doing a cookbook on top of her fitness videos slash brand, the youth center, the restaurant, her home garden, maintaining her relationships. Are you impressed with her ability to juggle everything? And it's so funny because after, this chapter, reading, I think it was again the next chapter, she mentions everything she has to juggle and then, adding on, a deeper relationship with Raylan and the kids and everything on top of everything she's already juggling. And I just think it's, she goes above and beyond even a normal person, for sure. And me, it's more impressive to me because I can't juggle too much at all. Like I'm very like I focus on one, maybe two things, and any more than that, like I just get very overwhelmed very easily. Where most people can kind of juggle, like a family life and friends and then work, but like she goes above and beyond, like 'cause she has multiple businesses going on top of maintaining her friendships and family life, and then her home garden and everything like that. Like she's definitely an overachiever, for sure, and I find it completely impressive that she's able to juggle so much. Like she's definitely very ambitious and but very capable as well, for sure. So Raylan brings up the beach trip and addresses his and Adrian's relationship with the kids. Why are their reactions so different? And Bradley's definitely older, which he says, he points out as well that he's older than Mariah and he remembers his mom and he still kind of talks to her in his head. So I think that definitely plays a part in it. And, I also think their genders do. Mariah, is definitely very the stereotypical little female girl. And I know like gender doesn't matter if you what you're into or anything like that, but the author definitely went very stereotypical with these children. You know, you have your stereotypical boy, you know, into superheroes and all that, and then your stereotypical girl who's a little fashionista and whatnot. So I think that plays a part in it as well because Mariah's the only girl in the house, so having another female that she can connect to and go and do fun stuff, fun female stuff with, I think definitely plays a part. But I also think it's their individual personalities because we've seen throughout the book, you know, Mariah's more just kind of easygoing, like she's very bright and positive. Where Bradley's definitely a little bit more cautious. Like he's kind of has a maturity to him, but he's also very, you know, cautious and likes to process everything, I think. So I think it's definitely, you know, there's multiple factors um, that causes the difference in their perspective and how they respond to everything. So Raylan takes off his wedding ring and has a last conversation with Laura Lee. What was it that made him ready to take this step? I think part of it was realizing how deeply his feelings for Adrian went. You know, at first it was just kind of a more laid back relationship, and then realizing just how deeply he does care about her. I think that was part of it. And excuse barking if you're hearing that. Um, but yeah, I think that was definitely, you know, acknowledging that and his feelings. Um, but I think more so it was his conversation with his mom. And she said, you know, that there's always room for more love. And then on top of that, Bradley is also kind of concerned about it. And he uses the same words his mom used to him to say to Bradley. And I think that just kind of solidified that it's true. You know, there is always more room for love. And it doesn't take anything away from how he loved Laura Lee or that, you know, now just because he loves Adrian, he doesn't love Laura Lee anymore. Um, and so I think, you know, just talking to his mom, she was kind of able, and then talking to Bradley just kind of solidified it for him that it was okay. It was okay, you know, to let go of that because it's not really letting go at all. It's still there. That love's still there. And then, you know, acknowledging his feelings for Adrian as well. So that's it for chapter 23. Let's go ahead and go on to chapter 24. Adrian talks to Tisha about Raylan taking off his wedding ring. How much less confusing would it be if they just talked to each other? And so I already did touch on this, you know, obviously in the last questions for the last chapter. But I think, again, communication is such a huge part of a relationship. And it's so important just to be honest and communicate what you're feeling and everything. And so that way you're not just sitting there wondering and, you know, getting stressed out or anything because that feeds into the relationship. But I do think Adrian's reasoning for not saying anything is definitely a little bit more solid than Raylan's was. You know, because it is sensitive. You know, she doesn't know. He hasn't brought it up. He just took off the ring and didn't say anything. So and that's really a sensitive subject. So she doesn't know if she should say anything, that she notices he took off the ring or not. But I think there was a way to kind of approach it. And at this point, you know, we see through her talking to Tisha, she hasn't really acknowledged her feelings and she's never had like a serious relationship either. So she's just now kind of acknowledging how deeply she does feel for Raylan and, you know, and wondering, you know, if she should take that next step with him or not because she never has before. So it is kind of a big step for her. So I think, you know, her reasoning for not saying anything is more solid than Raylan's is. But at the same time, it's like just talk to each other. And just, you know, you don't have to put him on the spot. You know, you don't even have to talk about the ring. Just talk about your own feelings, you know, and or where you stand in the relationship. And so yeah, I think they should just talk to each other and that wouldn't add any more stress. But Rachel, the PI, contacts another woman on the list. Tracy Potter seems to have more significance than the other women. Why? I think part of it, part of why the authors signified this woman over some of the others is because she this woman was right behind Lena, and so she was having an affair either at the same time as Lena or just after. And so she actually saw the assault on Lena in the office when Lena went to go tell Jonathan Bennett that she was pregnant. This woman, Tracy Potter, actually saw that. So I don't know if that was why she signified her so much. But I also think it maybe she might be the next target because they do kind of touch on that too. Like, that she is at risk and she's like, well, I'll put safety measures in place and everything like that. So she might be the next target. And I think either the poet's going to slip up. I think she's going to kind of play a part somehow. I might be completely wrong. We'll see as we finish up these chapters, but I do think she might play a part, and I think, like I said, that either maybe the poet targets her and slips up because she is aware, so she does have extra safety precautions, so they might be able to figure out exactly who it is. Or he does succeed, but he again slips up and gives them more to work with before he actually goes and targets Adrian. So I think there's going to be some significance to her as we go forward, but there's also a significance to her as far as the past as well. So Adrian takes Mariah shopping and seems to really enjoy spending time with the kids. How is her being authentic and enjoying time with them going to help the kids adjust to having her as a more prominent part of their lives? And I think, you know, sometimes like when somebody comes in, somebody new that starts dating, a father or mother, like sometimes they're not necessarily so authentic. Like they're trying to make an effort because they want to be a part of the mom or the father and the kids' lives, but they're not necessarily authentically enjoying their time. Like they're making that effort, but it's not like even if they weren't dating the father or the mother, they would spend that time talking to the kid. Or I think with Adrian, she would, like, even if she wasn't dating Raylan, she would still have these conversations with the kids. She would still maybe take Mariah shopping, things like that. So I think that's definitely going to help. And kids can tell when you're being authentic. And I think it's also, she's not stepping into her, so, dating Raylan and then stepping in, trying to be a mother and building a relationship that way. Like, she's just building a relationship with the kids. And like I said, that relationship's kind of separate from her dating their father. And so I think it's definitely going to help, especially with Bradley, who's a little bit more cautious. I think it's going to help form that bond on a more deeper level than just her as their father's girlfriend or their aunt's best friend. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. And Raylan asks Adrian to stay the night. Even though he already talked to the kids, how big of a step is this for everyone? And I think it is a huge step, and I definitely think it's a more official one. Like, yes, the kids know they're dating, and obviously Bradley has a minimal idea that they're sleeping together. He was seeking more comfort, and he doesn't really understand that dynamic between women and men yet. But I do think, obviously he's aware because we saw that as he discussed with his dad. Um, so I think it's another official step, and it's different. Like, yes, she's kind of been, they've been having dinners together and things like that. But staying the night, you get to see bedtime routines and morning routines, and so you just become a more integrated part of their life. Even though, obviously it's just a night, they're just staying the night, they're not moving in together or anything. It's still a big step. Um, and so I think it's definitely a bigger official step for everyone and just kind of helps integrate her more into their life. So that's it for chapter 24, and we're on to the last chapter, which is chapter 25. And first up, let's talk about Sadie. How has she been an important anchor for Adrian? And dogs and pets in general are such good anchors throughout difficult times. And I think, with Sadie, they got her after losing Sophia. Adrian and Dom got her, and so she was an important, part of just kind of bringing joy and happiness back, and helping them process the loss of losing Sophia. And then when Dom died, Sadie was that anchor. She's kind of been a transition with all the different transitions, which I can really relate to this. My one dog that I lost about a year ago, she was part of so many transitions in my life, and more so than like some of my other pets. Like she was there since I was a teenager into my 30s, so she saw a lot of transitions. And I think with Sadie, that's kind of the same. It was a transition period when they lost Sophia and Adrian was moving back home and then helping her grandfather, and they got a dog, and then she again was there through a transition of losing Dom and then just trying to figure out what life looked out now that she lost her grandfather. And I think, also they're kind of an anchor, through the hard times. Like Adrian's dealing with this poet and the stress of that. But with a dog or a pet, you don't have to explain yourself. You can just be like, she sometimes, like with the decision with the video, she had to explain herself to her friends and her family. And even though Raylan was very understanding and supportive, it's still, you have to have that conversation. Where with a dog, you can just be. You can just be upset. You don't have to have a conversation about it. And other pets too, not just dogs, but for all purposes, Sadie's a dog, so that's what we're talking about. So I do think, Sadie's been a very, very important part of not only Adrian's life, but the book. And I think she's going to be an important part, when the poet does act. I think Sadie's definitely going to have a role. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see how that happens. So Adrian, Maya, and Tisha have a girls' afternoon. Do you think Adrian would be as balanced without those friendships? And I think on one hand, yes, because she did have her grandparents. But on another hand, I don't think she would be quite as balanced because you do need friends on your own level. Even though her grandparents were definitely a positive influence for her, um, I don't think she would have been quite so open if she hadn't been able to form those friendships. And Maya, like Adrian points out, they both came into her life at pivotal points, especially Maya right after the incident. And then with Tisha, she came into her life, she had just started a new school. She was kind of feeling angry and just frustrated at the world. And she was ready to kind of strike out on her own. And that's when Tisha came into her life. And Tisha played, along with Hector and Lauren, played just such an important part on kind of building her own brand and just kind of striking out on her own away from her mother. So I do think, having them in her life definitely shaped who she became for sure. So Rachel talks to Nikki Bennett, who's the daughter of, Adrian's biological father. Rachel thinks she is hiding something. If she isn't involved, or even if she is in some way, do you have any sympathy for her? And I will, again, I've already kind of touched on it, and I'll talk more in the next question about what I think her involvement is. But I do kind of have sympathy for her. And as, we read this last chapter, I think she was genuinely surprised that her mother was Leek. I don't think she necessarily knew about that, because she did seem surprised. But she definitely does seem to have some hatred towards the Rizzos. And then, but I think she tried to build and get away, like separate herself from her family. So even though I think she is involved in some way, I think I do have sympathy for her because this wasn't her choice, to have to deal with this. And it seems like she's been trying to run away from it like her whole life, separate herself from her family, build something of her own too, which is exactly what Lena and Adrian both did. And so I can see kind of the parallel there. Like she built something, and was successful despite, her past and everything like that. But I do think she's involved, so the sympathy only goes so far. But I can, if I was in her position, I can have sympathy for her for sure. Um, Even though not necessarily if she is involved, being okay with whatever her involvement is. But let's go ahead and move on to the last question, which is Nikki is upset and surprised to see her brother JJ in her house. We are left with him hitting her. What does this say about their relationship and each of their potential involvement as the poet. So obviously they don't seem close. You know, she barely recognizes him, and she's surprised that he's there in her house. How did he get in? Everything like that. And then he punches her in the face. So I definitely don't think they're close. But again, I think she's somehow involved because Rachel pointed out that she's hiding something. And so I don't know if maybe in the past, like, she covered for him, or maybe she's providing for him financially, something like that. Like, she obviously knows something about him, that she's not telling Rachel's. So she, even though she's, you know, based on kind of the description and everything, she's tried to distance herself. I think there's still that protective layer there as well. But again, just with their interaction, I really think that it's him who's the poet. Um, and then, you know, she's the one that is maybe covering up something, or, you know, kind of being protective of him when she shouldn't be. But I do think, you know, that violence and everything just leans more towards him being a poet for sure. But that is it for those chapters. Let me know your thoughts down below. If there was any questions that stood out to you that you'd like to answer, that would be great as well. And this week we are going to be finishing up the chapters. We are going to be reading chapters 26 through 30 and finishing up the whole book. So definitely make sure you finish it up and then check back next Monday. I think what I'm going to do is next Monday we'll do discussion questions for the last set of chapters, and then I might do a bonus video on Thursday just to kind of, you know, say my final thoughts and everything. I think that's kind of what I want to do. I want to do 2 separate videos, do discussion questions, and then my final thoughts. But yeah, I'm excited to kind of finish up, especially because chapter 25 kind of left us on a cliffhanger, you know, with JJ coming in and that whole situation. So I'm really excited to see how it finishes up. But, and I also think, if you didn't see some of my posts on Facebook, I think that the author left a clue of who it might be, because I do think, like, she typically has the, you know, protagonist, as somebody that's kind of a part of the main character's life. So I do think that, is it protagonist or antagonist? I don't know. I'll put a little thing here, make sure I got the correct word. My brain's kind of fried today, but yeah. So I do think, you know, that they are a part of the small town in some way, or Adrian's interacted with them in some way. And I do think that the author left a clue for us. So it'll be interesting to see how that played out, and I would love to hear your thoughts on that as well. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and leave it here. I will see you guys next week. Happy reading, everyone. Bye.